This is episode 294, and it's January of 2026, and of course, it's goal setting season. But I'm not going to repeat what everyone else tells you about goal setting. We're going to talk about two differentiating factors that are really important for when you set and want to achieve your goals for the year, but often don't get talked about. So that is what this podcast is about. And if you're ready and able to, don't just make this a listening session, but also have a pen and paper ready, because I'm going to ask you some questions that you want to be prepared to answer. Okay, without further ado, let's dive in. Here are the two questions this podcast answers. 1, how do you successfully transition into your first official leadership role? And 2, how do you keep climbing that leadership ladder and continuously get promoted, although the competition and the expectations get bigger? This show, the Manager Track podcast, will provide the answers. I'm your host, Ramona Shaw. I'm on a mission to create workplaces where work is seen as a source of contribution, connection, and personal fulfillment. And this transition starts with developing a new generation of leaders who know how to lead so everyone wins and grows. In the show, you'll learn how to think, communicate, and act as a confident and competent leader you know you can be. I am so glad you're here. Happy New Year to you. And I'm excited that you're starting this year off with me and this podcast. My goal for this podcast continues to be to inspire you, to bring you food for thought and practical tips to strengthen your leadership skills. So at the time this podcast gets released, it's again January 2026, but I actually want to kick us off a year ago. So let's rewind to January 2025. Think about where you were early January a year ago. And I mean physically, like where were you that year? Pick a moment. Maybe it was in your apartment that you recall, or maybe you were traveling, but pick a moment that you can remember. It could be a birthday party, whatever that might have been. And now try to connect with the kind of person that you were. What goals did you set? What worries did you have? What did you enjoy? And what did you not enjoy? I know this may feel odd because we're actually talking about goals for 2026, but doing this quick reflection to recall who you were a year ago matters for the conversation we're going to have in this episode. And it's actually a really useful exercise. So if you're serious about your career goals or your life goals for the year, spend the few minutes here with me on this podcast actually doing the work. Don't skip it. Don't try to go the easy way. Actually do the work necessary for you to grow. Now, if you're like most of us, you now realize that the year 2025 didn't quite go as you planned. So if you remember January 2025, anticipating the year and the goals that you set and what you wanted to achieve, and now a year later, having seen what actually transpired, you probably realize that some things were easier than you thought, some were harder, some things that happened that you totally anticipated, others felt like a curveball that totally blindsided you. And maybe you or even someone in your family dealt with a health issue, maybe your company underwent a reorg or layoffs, maybe someone on your team resigned, maybe you yourself resigned and started a new job. Maybe it was a project that was supposed to be done by June that is actually still haunting you. This is normal. We set goals, we mean them, and then kind of life does its thing. Stuff happens, right? So here is what we're doing today. We're not throwing out goals. Goals do matter even if they change and life happens, right? But you can find a million YouTube videos on goal setting. And of course, we're going to check the show notes as well, because we're going to link to previously released episodes on goal setting. So I definitely encourage you to think about how to set strong goals, how to go about it, and all of that. Maybe even your organization has some process on how to set work goals and career goals. But what we are going to do instead in this episode is to look at two practices that most people skip, and they're the actual differentiators between plans that survive and plans that don't. Number 1 is the identity comes before the goal. Number 2 is preparing for what could go wrong. Now, I'm not exaggerating here, but this is going to change how you think about 2026. It's not going to be a long episode, but stick with me until the very end because we're going to talk about all these different steps that are going to amplify your goal setting process. So, as I said earlier, unless you're driving here or are at the gym or walking or something, if you can, close your eyes and imagine December 2026. Who are you then? So instead of looking back of who were you in January 2025 and what did you plan for? How did you think? Who was that person? You are not the same person that you were a year ago. And reflecting back to then and who you are today, you'll probably recognize like, oh man, I've grown a bunch. There are a lot of things that I see differently now, things that I've gotten stronger about, things that have changed. So now we're going to project forward. The same kind of concept, but into the future. December 2026. Who are you? Not what did you achieve, but who are you then? Because here's the thing. Goals are outcomes, but the identity is about who you become in the process of achieving those goals. And the identity is way stickier than the achievement in itself. It's also way more profound change that you undergo and allows you to actually personally grow through the achievement of goals. And if it's not for the growth of ourselves, then why are we trying to achieve goals? The idea that we'll be happier at some point or that we'll have fewer problems, that's an illusion. We all have problems, no matter how successful you are. We all have happy days and unhappy times. We all have challenges and problems. So it's not really that. It's the pursuit of goals. And of course, there might be some material benefits that go along with it. But the big part is really the growth of ourselves, the recognition of how we're changing, how we're achieving things, the pride that we develop when we see what we've accomplished. So the identity is a huge part, and it gets undervalued all the time when we just talk about, setting a goal and setting a target without really asking ourselves, who do I need to become? And this is not woo-woo. This is research. This has been proven over and over again. High performers build that identity. So let's spend some time today building your identity. And to start, some people like to give that person in the future a name. So let's say in my life, I've gone through multiple stages. And I want to say I'm building Ramona version 3.0. And I could say in a year, Ramona 3.0 will be my new normal. It's not yet. I'm still sort of like going forth and back between 2.0, 3.0, back to 2.0. But I want 3.0 to be the default and my target then to be on 4.0. And Ramona 3.0 is my label for who I want to be at the end of the year. Now, you could use a similar concept. You can also just create an alter ego name, or you can reference a particular role. Hey, if I'm a VP, then it's sort of that VP role that I'm really trying to, or that VP identity I'm really trying to live into. If it's an alter ego name, like Beyonce used Sasha Fierce, right, to grow into her stage persona, do whatever works for you. But having a term makes this easier. But really, the core of this is describing this person. And you might want to start with asking yourself a few questions. Even if you're now driving or walking, think about this. How do you decide in that new future, right? At the end of the year, how will you decide when you're under pressure? What will you do then? What are the standards that you keep and that will be non-negotiable for you, even when you're slammed or even when it gets uncomfortable? How do you treat people when the stakes are high? Ask that next version. How will you be thinking about your coworkers, about work, about your organization? What do you practice, or what will you practice on a weekly or maybe even a daily basis? Those are questions to sort of like get started and start to define that identity. Ramona 3.0, how will she think? How will she operate? What will she be doing? What standards will she uphold no matter what? How will she display courage? All of those questions are things that I'm answering today in order to start to live into that and really embody that identity. Now, I said this is research backed, but why does it actually work? The whole concept is called identity-based motivation. People are way more likely to take action when it feels consistent with who they are. And when things get hard, they interpret that difficulty differently if it fits their identity versus if it doesn't. This is also a concept called self-concordance. So goals that align with your actual values and interests and your identity predict sustained effort over time. Not just sort of the short burst, but the sustained effort. So if you see yourself as a runner and you say, I'm a runner, that's just what I do. Every day I run, and that is your identity. You're significantly more likely to run every day than if you see this as like, I'm going to try running. I'm going to pick up running for a little while. This is what happens with New Year's resolutions. We set this idea into motion that we could just try something out, or we're going to do some kind of action or change a behavior. But we never really think about the identity of the person who would sustain that behavior. So running, you have to start thinking like a runner. How does a runner warm up? How does a runner think about their day, about their plans, about their schedule, about their gear, their recovery time, the stretching? All those things don't come from a place of, I'm going to try running. They come from a place of like, no, I am a runner. This is part of my identity. And it may not feel natural at first at all. It's living into that and starting to adapt the thoughts of someone who might be a runner. If it's hard for you to come up with these answers because you've never been a runner, let's say, look for people that you know who are runners. Let's say Usain Bolt, for the sake of it. How would, in his prime time or as he was younger, how did he think about his day, about his plan? Maybe it's someone in your closer environment that you think, okay, they may be a little bit more relatable than Usain Bolt. What does this person do? How do they think about running? And I'm using running because it's relatable, but you also have the exact same questions and it's the same concept, whether that is a position that you're trying to get promoted into, maybe a leadership position, maybe a director role, a VP role, maybe you want to build something on the side, maybe it's some other kind of habit or you want to change your job, whatever that may be. Think about the people who do this and how do they think? How do they go about their day? That is what you want to start to bring closer to your own identity so that you're shifting that identity. And once you have your identity and this becomes fairly clear, then we're moving on to the next step, and that is to pick 3 goals that are proof of that identity. But again, not the identity itself. It's just proof. So for example, I know that many listeners of this podcast are either, new managers or they're stepping into bigger, more senior leadership roles. So let's say you want to become a director. So we're not just saying like, oh, I want to become a director and that is the goal. That's nice, but not really helpful. Instead, if you think about building the identity, now we're asking ourselves, okay, as a director, when you're in a leadership meeting and someone challenges your team's priorities, let's say, how do you respond? What would it feel like inside? How do you handle pushback from a peer? What is the type of work that you want to do? How do you contribute to the organization in terms of increased revenue, efficiency, or cost saving to actually deserve that director title? And how do you need to think in order to achieve that value add and deliver those contributions? So get really familiar with this version of you and their way of thinking, feeling, and acting. Because you can't really fake it from the inside out. I'm going to really hone in on this. Trying to memorize the right sentences without actually seeing yourself as that person feels hollow. It's often also not sustainable. It might work for a conversation or two, but then we're going to revert back to our own identity. Or it just starts to feel somewhat disconnected and misaligned. So it is both a behavioral change as well as doing this inside work. When the two come together, this is way more effective than just changing behaviors. So again, going back to those goals, Choose goals that prove you're operating as a director. This could be, hey, by the end of the year, I will freely speak my opinions, even if they are counter to what the entire group in the room thinks. Then I will know I'm operating at the director level. 2, I tend to get buy-in for my ideas, not just from my team, peers, and my direct managers, but also from senior leaders due to my ability to influence and practice strong executive communication. So by year end, if I look at all the different ideas or projects that I wanted to initiate, how often did I get the buy-in? Is that overwhelmingly I did, yes, succeeded, or did I get shut down, or people didn't really want to buy into it, or there was more of, okay, I'm going to do because you're my boss and told me so, or because I actually inspired us to all wanting to achieve a goal. That's something that we can measure or fairly accurately assess at year end. And then third, let's use this value add idea. I add a massive amount of value to my organization by thinking outside the box, finding opportunities to reduce costs, increase revenue, or optimize efficiency. Can I at year end measure and demonstrate that I've initiated these projects, that I've achieved those goals or those targets that I just laid out? At year end, if I check the box on all of these 3 goals, I am now operating as a director, whether I have the title or not. Whether you get the title and the promotion is less important because it's not fully in your control. But how you think, how you feel, and how you act, that is 100% in your control. And if that's in alignment with how someone as a director would operate, then your promotion, either inside that organization or elsewhere, is inevitable. Okay, so that's 1, the identity shift that needs to happen in alignment with the goals that you're trying to achieve. And with that, let's now move to the second point. And here is where we get a little ancient, okay? The Stoics had this practice that was about premeditating evils, so to speak. And I know it sounds intense, but it's not about being negative. It's about rehearsing setbacks so that they don't destroy you when they show up. In many organizations or teams, they now call this running a pre-mortem. And really the idea is simple. You assume the plan that you're embarking on or trying to execute didn't work. So what if all this failed? What if I wasn't going to accomplish my goals? And then you list the most likely reasons why. Not to be dramatic, not to spiral, but to surface the predictable friction points early to address time constraints, shifting priorities, resourcing gaps, energy dips that we might have, or resistance from stakeholders. And then when you identify those risks, then you turn those into safeguards and responses so that the plan is built for reality. This is also a point that Jim Collins makes in his book, Good to Great. The most successful CEOs were not better at predicting the future. They were better prepared for it. And research backs up why this works as well. People are more likely to follow through when they decide in advance what they'll do in common derailment moments. In fancy academic terms, this is called the implementation intentions, but it's really just making a simple rule for yourself that if X happens, I will do Y. Same with planning prompts. When people get specific about when and how they'll take action, they'll be more likely to actually do it. So if you make a plan, you're way more likely to actually execute it than if you don't. And that includes the plan B and plan C, the worst case scenario plan, not just the best case plan. And now here's one more bonus. Making a concrete plan also reduces sort of the intrusive, anxious thoughts about unfinished goals or what if scenarios. It frees up mental space. And you're not walking around anxious about, the thing that you haven't done yet or what might happen because you already planned for it. And this is important if you tend to feel anxious about work or life in general. Okay, let's do this together. I'm going to walk you through a short pre-mortem. Imagine it's October 2026 and your biggest goal for this year failed. It didn't happen. now I'm going to ask you, what was the goal that you thought about? So if the biggest goal failed, what's the first goal that comes to mind? Just write down that goal. And then write down 5 reasons why. Don't edit yourself. If it sounds like odd or weird, don't worry about it. Just write down 5 reasons for why this goal might fail. And then once you have that, the next step, or step number 3, is to circle the 3 most likely reasons. The ones that, if you're honest, you can actually kind of see happening. Okay? Step 4 is then, for each of those 3 that you chose, choose 1 preventive action and 1 recovery action. So prevention is, what can you do now to make this less likely? And recovery is, if it happens anyway, what's going to be your move? So write this down. I'm going to quickly recap. 1, think about your biggest goal. 2, write down 5 reasons why this might fail. 3, circle the top 3 reasons why that goal might fail. And then for each of those 3, write down a preventive action, something you can do to reduce the likelihood of this happening. And then second, a recovery action, something that you can do if it still does happen. If you actually just went through this, you did something that most people never do. You are not just prepared because you planned and you set goals, but you prepared for reality, for the things that actually are not going to work out as nicely as we put them on paper. This is what we call being prepared. And again, going back to Jim Collins, the CEOs that were actually successful and created great, not just good companies, were all the ones that were prepared, way more so for all the different scenarios than those that weren't. And if we imagine that we're the CEOs of our own lives, it is our responsibility, if you want to have a good life, to do exactly that. Okay, now let's bring it all together and combine it with the identity shift we just discussed earlier. So if you merge the two, you start off describing your new identity and give it a name, right? Really get clear of Ramona 3.0. How does she think? How does she feel? What does she do? How does she make decisions? How does she treat people? How is she engaged with family? Even stuff like this. How does she work out? All those different things. Like, get really clear on who that is, that identity that you have for yourself. Then pick 3 proof goals, things that demonstrate the identity. And then you move into the whole pre-mortem conversation where you look at your biggest goals and you look at what might be the risks that get in the way and how to address them. Now, if you stuck with me until now and you're actually doing this exercise, whether this is now or you're committed to doing this sometime later today or later this week, that's amazing. You're actually getting started and you're doing way more than most people. But it's not the end of it, right? This whole thing is going to stand or fall based on how often you will review it. So reading your identity and your pre-mortem plan weekly is key. And it doesn't need to take a long time. It might be a minute. Like, I like to put a reminder in my calendar, or you could put a prompt on your phone to send you a reminder every, let's say, Sunday night, every Monday, to read that plan again, 1 minute each week. Now, to really hone this in, I thought I'm going to share a couple of stories with you here. So first, I'm going to tell you about Marcus. Marcus is a product manager. He made a really good plan. He showed me sort of a Gantt chart. He had dependencies for a project. All of it was really well laid out. But he ignored constraints. So he was confident with what he was trying to achieve and which timeline and whatnot for his product launch. And of course, as a quick side note, every time I refer to a client, I do change things, including the name, to ensure anonymity. Okay, so he ignored constraints. He assumed, what so many people do, that his team would stay intact. So his plan was all based on the team members that he currently have, and he anticipated they would sort of stay with him throughout this project. He also assumed that stakeholders would all be aligned because he was so convinced that this project was really important. He got a lot of buy-in already. He had a lot of conversations. And so in sum, he assumed that no one would leave, no one would get sick, and no priorities would shift. And so 6 months in, the whole thing fell apart. Not because he was bad at the job, but because he planned for the best case scenario. he did not think about what might happen. Think about your team. If you're leading a team right now, if especially in the US, where someone could basically resign and walk out the same day, the risk that your team or your organization carries with this is crazy. So if you don't anticipate that someone might resign on your team and how that's going to impact workload, the rest of the team, your project, where are those sensitive areas, those risks? That is what we want to address early on. So in Marcus's case, he then did a pre-mortem for that next phase of his project. He added buffers, he made if-then plans for the 3 sort of most likely disasters or risks. And this time, he was able to communicate better and more transparently with stakeholders and his team. He was able to address the risks in way more detail because he actually thought about it. He was able to secure resources just in case, which he actually ended up not needing, but he had them on the side because he knew if another team member was to leave, he would have an issue and he wouldn't be able to deliver on time. So he made sure that he had a backup plan in place. Not only did that help him in the execution, it also made him appear a lot more like a leader, right? He showed up like a leader. People saw his foresight, his preparation, and considered that to be leadership skills. He also adapted to change so much quicker and stayed calmer through the process because in his mind, he already played out those scenarios. A different example is Jennifer. She's a new director and she did the identity work first. She wrote out who she wanted to be. She looked at her goal list and realized that she had like 15 different goals, 15 things she wanted to do. In our conversation, I asked her the question, which of those 15 goals, things that she wanted to do, would actually matter to this new identity, to this new persona, right? That she's trying to become, this director level persona. It was actually only 3 goals that mattered to who she wanted to be. Now, of course, there were some things were a bit of gray zone. We weren't quite sure, but many of them were obligations from the past, were not relevant to her new identity, but were important for her older identity. It was not worth her time to spend on this. And she had to practice to say no to things that are nice to have, things that she liked to do, things that she used to do, but would be distractions. And the person she wants to become would absolutely and certainly say no to those things. Or would say yes, but with a tweak, or only half of that, or not in the full capacity, but only to a smaller extent I can, engage or help. But would negotiate their commitment to this project or effort, not just say yes. So when we change that identity to look at what are all the things that we're doing that are actually no longer in alignment with this new identity, that's part of sort of the pruning process as well. When she did that and she realized like all these nice goals that excited her, that she liked, but they actually weren't in alignment with her pursuit to really become that and live as that successful director. She shed a bunch. She started saying no to things that were distractions, and she became a lot more consistent with the things she was actually supposed to do. Her team noticed and her boss noticed. And at the end of the year, she hit all of those 3 goals and delivered great value as a director in her first year. And to her, the most fulfilling part was really seeing how she became the leader she wanted to be, and she realized she needed to be, even if this whole pruning process was really hard. And so both this example of shifting the identity to really live into this new persona, as well as preparing for worst case scenarios and doing those pre-mortems, are 2 things that are critically important to achieving goals in 2026. So in a one-liner, set goals, but win the year by designing your identity and rehearsing those obstacles. I hope you found this helpful as we kickstart the new year. We will continue as we have for the last few years to release a new episode every single Tuesday. If you found this helpful and you want to share this with a friend, please do so. It helps us grow and reach more people who are looking to become more confident and competent leaders. Thanks so much for tuning in, for hopefully doing the work and taking this as some food for thought when you think about your Q1 or full year 2026 goals. And with that, that's a wrap. We'll be back next Tuesday. Bye for now. If you enjoyed this episode, then check out 2 other awesome resources to help you become a leader people love to work with. This includes a free masterclass on how to successfully lead as a new manager. Check it out at arcova.org/masterclass. The second resource is my best-selling book, The Confident and Competent New Manager: How to Quickly Rise to Success in Your First Leadership Role. Check it out at arcova.org/books or head on over to Amazon and grab your copy there. You can find all those links in the show notes down below.